The rhythmic, insistent thrum-thrum-thrum of the cardiac monitor was singing a dirge. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit confines of surgical ICU Room 3, a battle was being lost. Mrs. Rodriguez, a 72-year-old grandmother, who'd just undergone a routine bypass, was crashing. Her skin was a terrifying ashen gray, her lips cyanotic, and the monitor screamed out a steadily dropping blood pressure and an accelerating erratic heart rate. Nurses flapped like startled birds around the bed, their faces etched with panic, shouting numbers that grew more dire with each passing second. BP dropping to 70, 40, pulse 140 and thready, SATs 85 on maximal oxygen, Nurse Miller's voice cracked. Alara Vance, known to everyone as Ellie, moved with a controlled intensity that belied the chaos. Her slim frame, usually unassuming, became a conduit of calm competence. She wasn't shouting, she was assessing, her keen eyes darting between the patient, the monitors, and the medication drips. While others called for more fluids, more pressors, Ellie felt a disquieting tremor beneath the obvious. Mrs. Rodriguez's lung sounds were too clear, her extremities too warm despite the hypotension. It wasn't just a volume issue or simple cardiogenic shock. Something else was quietly, insidiously, killing her. Ellie gently, but firmly, pushed Miller aside. "Get me a portable ultrasound. Stat. And pull up her labs from an hour ago. Specifically look at her electrolytes and arterial blood gas." Her voice was low, yet it cut through the din. There was an authority there, earned through years of seeing the subtle dance between life and death. As Miller scrambled, Ellie's gloved hands moved. She felt Mrs. Rodriguez's neck, searching for jugular venous distension, then quickly checked her peripheral pulses. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, narrowed in thought. The ultrasound arrived. Ellie barely hesitated, slicking gel over Mrs. Rodriguez's chest and expertly maneuvering the transducer. The image flickered onto the screen, a dark, crescent-shaped shadow expanding around the heart. "Pericardial effusion," Ellie announced, her voice rising now, urgent. "Cardiac tamponade." She's got blood accumulating around her heart, squeezing it, preventing it from pumping. A gasp went around the room. Cardiac tamponade was a rare, deadly complication, especially after bypass. It required immediate surgical intervention, but more importantly, it was missed. All the focus had been on the more obvious signs of heart failure. "Get Dr. Croft now," Ellie barked, already prepping a sterile field for an emergency pericardiocentesis, a needle aspiration to relieve the pressure until surgery could be arranged. She knew it was outside her typical scope, but there was no time for hesitation. This woman was dying. Just as Ellie was about to grasp the long, slender needle, the doors to SICU Room 3 swung open and Dr. Julian Croft strode in. He was a man who commanded attention effortlessly, tall, with a surgeon's intense gaze and a reputation that preceded him even in the bustling corridors of St. Jude's Hospital. His dark hair was perpetually a little disheveled from running his hands through it, a nervous habit that belied his almost legendary precision in the operating theater. He took in the scene, Ellie, poised with the needle, the terrified nurses, the crashing patient, in a single, comprehensive glance. "What's going on?" His voice was calm, deep, cutting through the residual panic. "Dr. Croft, Mrs. Rodriguez developed a rapid pericardial effusion. Cardiac tamponade," Ellie reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I was just preparing for an emergency pericardiocentesis. Surgical team should be here any minute to take her back to the OR for exploration." Julian's eyes, a piercing shade of blue, met hers. He didn't question her. He trusted her. He saw the ultrasound image on the monitor, the definitive proof. "Good work, Nurse Vance," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his tone. He swiftly took over, guiding the needle with practiced ease, relieving the immediate pressure on Mrs. Rodriguez's heart. The monitor's frantic thrumming began to slow, steadying into a more reassuring rhythm. The crisis was averted. Later, as the surgical team wheeled Mrs. Rodriguez back to the OR, her color returning, her blood pressure stabilizing, a palpable sense of relief settled over the unit. Ellie was meticulously charting the events, her adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving her feeling pleasantly exhausted. A shadow fell over her chart. It was Beatrice Cole, the nurse administrator for the surgical wing. Beatrice was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper opinions, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to strain against her scalp, her perpetually pursed lips hinting at perpetual disapproval. She surveyed Ellie with a look that managed to be both dismissive and scrutinizing. A bit bold with that ultrasound, wouldn't you say, Nurse Vance? Beatrice's voice was cool, laced with a barely perceptible chill. We have residents and fellows for diagnostic procedures. Nurses should stick to their lane. Ellie met her gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Mrs. Rodriguez was coding, Miss Cole. There was no time to wait. My assessment identified a life-threatening, immediately reversible condition that was being missed. Beatrice merely sniffed, a dismissive flick of her wrist. Just ensure you're not overstepping your duties, Nurse Vance. Our hospital thrives on order and adherence to protocol. She walked away, her footsteps crisp and authoritative, leaving a faint scent of lemon polish in her wake. The comment, innocuous on the surface, felt like a subtle warning, a planting of the first seed of conflict. Ellie sighed, brushing it off as Beatrice being Beatrice. As Ellie was gathering her things, ready for the blessed quiet of her apartment, a hand gently touched her arm. It was Dr. Croft. Vance, a moment? Julian's voice was softer now, removed from the urgency of the ICU. He led her to a quiet corner near the nurse's station, away from the lingering staff. That was incredibly astute. You picked up on something that eluded everyone else, not just the diagnosis, but your reasoning for ruling out the more obvious. You have an exceptional mind for this. Ellie felt a blush creep up her neck. Compliments from Julian Croft, the brilliant chief of surgery, were rare and highly coveted. Thank you, Dr. Croft. Just doing my job. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that softened the usual intensity of his features. More than that, listen, I'd like to discuss the case further. Over coffee, tomorrow morning before rounds? Say 7 a.m. at the cafe across the street? His gaze was direct, searching. It was a request, not an order, and the slight hesitation in his voice, the way his eyes held hers, made it clear it wasn't just about the case. It was a subtle but unmistakable breach of their usual professional distance. Ellie's heart gave an unexpected flutter. This could be something more. The coffee to discuss the case further became a ritual. It started discreetly, early morning rendezvous at the little independent cafe across from street. Jude's. The one that smelled perpetually of roasted beans and warm pastries. Their conversations initially did revolve around patient care, surgical techniques, and the latest medical journals. Ellie found Julian's intellect exhilarating, his passion for medicine mirroring her own. He, in turn, was fascinated by her observational skills, her intuitive grasp of patient nuances that often went unnoticed by doctors focused on the bigger picture. But soon, the discussions drifted. They talked about their lives outside the hospital, the small victories and frustrations. Julian confessed his childhood dream of being an astrophysicist, explaining the complex beauty of the cosmos with the same fervor he used to describe a new surgical approach. Ellie spoke of her love for hiking, of the solace she found in the quiet majesty of the redwood forests. They discovered a shared love for obscure jazz and independent films. Their interactions at the hospital, meanwhile, remained rigorously professional. No lingering touches, no special favors, just the same respectful collaboration they'd always shared. Yet, a new current hummed beneath the surface, a shared secret that made the mundane tasks of their day-to-day work subtly more vibrant. A quick, shared glance across a busy ward, a conspiratorial half-smile when their eyes met. These were the small, illicit treasures of their burgeoning affection. Lunch breaks occasionally stretched into stolen moments in the quiet hospital garden, their voices low, their shoulders brushing. A late-night text from Julian, checking in after a particularly grueling shift, became a welcome comfort for Ellie. One evening, after a particularly challenging day that saw them both working well past their shifts, they found themselves sharing a late dinner in the almost empty hospital cafeteria. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a clinical glow on their tired faces. Julian, leaning back, loosened his tie. "You know, Vance," he began, his voice weary but warm, "I've worked with hundreds of nurses over the years. You're different. You see things. You anticipate. It's truly remarkable." Ellie, stirring her lukewarm coffee, felt a warmth spread through her. "And you, Dr. Croft? You're the most focused surgeon I've ever assisted. You're calm in the OR. Even when things go sideways, it's reassuring." He chuckled softly. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Nurse Vance." His eyes twinkled. "But seriously, I admire your dedication and your resilience." Their eyes met across the sterile table, and in that shared glance, something shifted. The professional barrier, already permeable, dissolved a little further. It was clear now. This was more than professional respect. This was genuine, undeniable connection. However, not everyone at St. Jude's was blind to the subtle change. Beatrice Cole was a hawk, keenly attuned to any deviation from what she considered the proper order of the hospital. She had a sixth sense for perceived impropriety, especially when it involved her nurses and the esteemed doctors, particularly the chief of surgery. Beatrice had begun her own quiet observations. She noticed Julian Croft's almost imperceptible nod to Ellie when he entered the SICU, a gesture he didn't extend to other nurses. She saw the way Ellie's back straightened just a fraction, a subtle change in her posture whenever Dr. Croft was in the vicinity. She noticed the way their eyes seemed to find each other across a crowded hallway, a brief, silent communication that excluded everyone else. Beatrice, ever meticulous, started her own mental log, which quickly transferred to a physical one in a small, leather-bound notebook she kept locked in her office drawer. October 12th. Nurse Vance and Dr. Croft seen lingering in the staff lounge, 15 minutes after official shift end. Conversed in low tones. October 20th. Dr. Croft made a point of seeking Nurse Vance's input during morning rounds, overlooking more senior nurses. November 3rd. Both arrived at the hospital within minutes of each other, 6:45 a.m. Unlikely coincidence. To Beatrice, these weren't innocuous moments. They were pieces of a puzzle, constructing a narrative of unprofessional conduct and favoritism. She saw it as an affront to her authority, a blurring of lines that she meticulously drew and enforced. In Beatrice's world, nurses were meant to be subordinates, diligently executing orders, not engaging in familiarities with the chief of surgery. It challenged her very concept of the hospital hierarchy, a hierarchy she guarded with zealous ferocity. Beatrice decided it was time for a preemptive strike, a gentle but firm reminder to Ellie of her place. One particularly busy Tuesday, Ellie arrived for her shift to find her patient assignments were unusually arduous. She was given Mrs. Henderson, a notoriously difficult patient with complex needs and a tendency to complain about everything, alongside two other critical post-op cases requiring constant monitoring. Most nurses considered this a punishment shift. Ellie, though inwardly sighing, accepted the challenge without complaint. She meticulously managed her patients, anticipating their needs, de-escalating Mrs. Henderson's complaints with calm empathy. By the end of her shift, all her patients were stable, and she had completed every task, every chart, flawlessly. As she was clocking out, Beatrice intercepted her. "Nurse Vance, a word?" Her voice was tight. Ellie turned, bracing herself. "Yes, Miss Cole? I've noticed your workload has been rather robust lately," Beatrice began, her lips barely moving. "But it's important that all nurses contribute equally to the challenging cases. We can't have anyone thinking they're exempt from difficult assignments, can we?" Ellie blinked, trying to decipher the veiled accusation. "I complete all my assignments to the best of my ability, Miss Cole." Beatrice's eyes, as cold as chips of ice, narrowed. "Of course. Just a reminder to maintain proper professional boundaries, Nurse Vance. We wouldn't want any perceptions of impropriety to emerge, especially when dealing with senior medical staff. It can lead to uncomfortable situations for everyone involved." The implication hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Beatrice hadn't explicitly mentioned Julian, but she didn't need to. The message was clear: "I see what's happening, and I don't approve. Be warned." Ellie felt a prickle of anger, but she swallowed it down. "My professional boundaries are impeccable, Miss Cole, and my focus remains solely on patient care." She kept her voice even, refusing to rise to the bait. Beatrice simply gave her a thin, humorless smile. "See that they remain so." She turned and walked away, leaving Ellie with a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. The first act of aggression had been subtle, disguised as a concern for workload distribution and professional boundaries. But Ellie knew what it was. It was a clear, unsupported warning, and the rage for the reader, for Ellie, had just begun to simmer. The subtle jabs and veiled warnings from Beatrice escalated over the next few weeks. Ellie found herself under a microscope. Every late charting entry, every interaction with a doctor, every slightly longer than necessary conversation at the nurse's station, seemed to draw Beatrice's piercing gaze. Ellie felt constantly on edge, the joy of her work slowly being eroded by the persistent, low-level anxiety. The clandestine moments with Julian, once a source of delight, now felt tinged with a dangerous thrill, like dancing on the edge of a cliff. Then came the incident. It was a Friday afternoon, a normally quiet time in the SICU. Mr. Davids, a patient recovering from a complex abdominal surgery, suddenly developed a fever spike and an elevated white blood cell count. Ellie, meticulously following protocol, immediately notified the surgical team, administered prescribed antibiotics, and initiated a full workup for infection. It was a textbook, post-operative complication, handled precisely by the book. There was no negligence, no delay, nothing out of the ordinary. The infection was caught early, and Mr. Davids responded well to treatment, but Beatrice saw an opening. The following Monday, Ellie was called into Beatrice's office, an icy room with stark white walls and a large, unblinking surveillance camera pointed at the door. Sitting beside Beatrice was Mr. Davies, the hospital's HR representative. Mr. Liebs/HR. Davies was a man who looked like he was carved from granite. Gray suit, gray tie, graying hair, and eyes that held all the warmth of a freshly polished, sterile tray. He exuded an air of corporate detachment, his demeanor perfectly calibrated to be intimidating without being overtly hostile. "Nurse Vance, please have a seat," Beatrice said, gesturing to the single, uncomfortable visitor's chair. Her tone was devoid of any pleasantries. Ellie sat, her heart beginning to pound a warning beat. She immediately knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. "We're here today to discuss a formal complaint regarding your professional conduct," Mr. Davies stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He opened a thick folder on the table between them. "Specifically, concerning the recent care of Mr. Davids and other related incidents that suggest a pattern of distraction and compromised judgment." Ellie stared, incredulous. "Mr. Davids's infection was managed perfectly. There was no lapse in care." Beatrice leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "According to your charting, Nurse Vance. However, my observations suggest otherwise. The incident report I filed, dated last Friday, highlights a delay in noticing Mr. David's initial symptoms, a delay caused, I believe, by a preoccupation with non-work-related matters." Ellie felt a hot surge of anger. "That is a lie! I notified the team the moment the fever registered. I was on top of his care." Mr. Davies held up a hand, stopping her. "Nurse Vance, please refrain from accusations. This is an investigation, not an argument. Miss Cole has provided a detailed log of your interactions with Dr. Julian Croft. It paints a picture of an inappropriate relationship that has, in Miss Cole's professional opinion, impacted your ability to perform your duties impartially and with the required focus." He began to read from Beatrice's meticulously compiled log. October 12th. Nurse Vance and Dr. Croft seen lingering in the staff lounge, 15 minutes after official shift end. Conversed in low tones. He paused, looking at Ellie. "Can you explain the nature of this conversation, Nurse Vance?" "We were discussing a complex patient case from earlier that day," Ellie stated, trying to keep her voice steady. It was technically true. Their conversation had started that way. Mr. Davies continued, unperturbed. October 20th. Dr. Croft made a point of seeking Nurse Vance's input during morning rounds, overlooking more senior nurses. This could be interpreted as favoritism, creating a perception of an unfair work environment for your colleagues. Ellie felt a chill. They were twisting everything. "Dr. Croft sought my input because I was the primary nurse for that patient and had the most up-to-date information," she countered, her voice beginning to tremble with indignation. "That's standard procedure," Beatrice interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. "But other nurses present felt that your relationship with the chief of surgery afforded you preferential treatment, Nurse Vance. It creates discord. It undermines morale." "What relationship?" Ellie demanded, her frustration boiling over. "We are colleagues. We have coffee sometimes to discuss work. That's it." Mr. Davies's expression remained impassive. November 3rd. Both arrived at the hospital within minutes of each other, 6:45 a.m. Unlikely coincidence, suggestive of shared commute or pre-work meeting. And then, of course, there's the matter of the late-night dinner in the cafeteria last week. You were observed, Nurse Vance, by multiple staff members sharing a meal with Dr. Croft after hours. This clearly goes beyond professional interaction. Ellie was aghast. They had been discreet, hadn't they? How had they found out about the cafeteria? Her face flushed with shame and a burning sense of injustice. They were picking apart her life, twisting innocent interactions into something sordid. "Dr. Croft and I are both dedicated to our patients," Ellie said, choosing her words carefully. We simply have a good professional rapport. There is no inappropriate relationship, and my care for Mr. Davids was exemplary." Mr. Davies leaned forward, his voice taking on a slightly harder edge. "Whether or not the relationship is inappropriate is not the primary issue here, Nurse Vance. The primary issue is the perception it creates. We have received feedback from other staff members regarding an uncomfortable atmosphere, a feeling that your closeness to Dr. Croft could lead to unfair advantages or even a hostile work environment for those who don't share such personal ties." He made personal ties sound like a disease. "This, coupled with your alleged distraction during Mr. David's care, leads us to serious concerns about your judgment and your ability to maintain professional detachment." Suddenly, the door to Beatrice's office burst open. Julian Croft stood there, his face a mask of furious indignation, his eyes blazing. "What is the meaning of this, Beatrice? What are you doing to Nurse Vance?" Beatrice looked utterly delighted, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. Mr. Davies, however, merely sighed, pulling out a pen and making a note. "Dr. Croft, you are not authorized to be in this meeting," Mr. Davies said calmly, though his eyes held a steely glint. "This is a confidential HR investigation." "Confidential? You're interrogating an innocent nurse based on baseless accusations and petty jealousy," Julian retorted, striding into the room. He stood protectively beside Ellie. "This is an attack on her character and her competence. There is absolutely no professional misconduct here. Nurse Vance is one of the finest nurses this hospital has, and her care of Mr. Davids was impeccable." Mr. Davies closed his folder with a deliberate snap. He then slowly, deliberately, wrote something new on a blank sheet. "Dr. Croft, I must now add to the official record that you have attempted to use your senior position to unduly influence an ongoing HR investigation. This action, sir, further confirms the very claims of favoritism and inappropriate professional boundaries we are currently discussing. It strongly suggests a deep personal interest in Nurse Vance that compromises your own professional judgment as chief of surgery." Julian looked like he'd been punched. He saw the trap, sprung perfectly. His attempt to defend Ellie had only served to incriminate them both further. The smug satisfaction on Beatrice's face was almost unbearable. Ellie, watching Julian's shoulders slump slightly, felt a wave of despair wash over her. They had weaponized the system, turned every act of support and every shared moment of connection into evidence against them. She felt utterly helpless, humiliated, and terrified. She had just been ambushed, her integrity questioned, her career threatened, and the man she loved had been ensnared in the same malicious web. The meeting ended with Mr. Davies informing Ellie that a formal review of her conduct would be initiated, with potential disciplinary action, including suspension or termination. She left the office feeling like she had walked through a gauntlet, her spirit bruised and battered. The system, designed to protect, was now being wielded as a bludgeon. The formal review was swift and brutal. Within days, Ellie received a letter. She was placed on formal probation for a period of 3 months, citing failure to maintain appropriate professional boundaries and creating a perception of a hostile work environment. The letter also contained a veiled threat about further disciplinary action, including termination if there were any more incidents. Beatrice made sure the news spread like wildfire through the surgical wing. During the next staff meeting, she announced Ellie's probation with a thin smile, emphasizing the importance of upholding Jude's standards of professionalism and conduct. She didn't explicitly mention Julian, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. Ellie became a pariah. Her few friends among the nursing staff, wary of being tainted by association, grew distant. Casual greetings became strained nods. Conversations died when she approached. Whispers followed her down the hallways, hushed tones that ceased abruptly as she passed. She felt like she was constantly walking through an invisible gauntlet of judgment and suspicion. Lunch breaks in the staff lounge became solitary affairs. No one wanted to sit with Dr. Croft's nurse. The isolation was crushing, almost as painful as the accusations themselves. Beatrice, emboldened by her initial victory, intensified her campaign of harassment. She systematically assigned Ellie the most difficult, uncooperative, or critically ill patients, stacking her workload to an unmanageable degree. Ellie regularly found herself responsible for patients who required constant attention, leaving her no room for error, and often forcing her to stay late, unpaid, just to complete her charting. Beatrice often forgot to relay critical information during shift changes, leaving Ellie to discover vital updates about patient conditions or new orders at the last minute, forcing her to scramble. One morning, Ellie discovered that a crucial medication order for a post-op cardiac patient had been entered incorrectly in the system, a decimal point in the wrong place that would have resulted in a dangerous overdose. Ellie immediately caught it, corrected it, and reported it to pharmacy and the prescribing doctor. Later, Beatrice called her into her office again, not to commend her vigilance, but to admonish her. "Nurse Vance, I've received a report that you made an unauthorized change to a physician's order," Beatrice stated, her voice icy. "That is a serious breach of protocol." "Miss Cole, the order was for 10 times the appropriate dose. It was a clear error. I corrected it and immediately notified the pharmacy and the attending physician. I prevented a patient harm incident," Ellie exclaimed, incredulous at the twisted narrative. Beatrice merely raised an eyebrow. "It is not your place to unilaterally alter orders. You should have simply clarified with the prescribing physician. Your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, show poor judgment and a tendency to overstep your authority. It's a concerning pattern." The implication was clear. Ellie was being set up, every professional action scrutinized and twisted into a transgression. Ellie started double-checking every single chart, every order, every detail, knowing that Beatrice was actively looking for a reason to terminate her. The constant vigilance was exhausting, draining her physically and emotionally. She lived in a perpetual state of anxiety, her stomach churning, her sleep fragmented by nightmares of making a mistake. The immense pressure began to take its toll on her relationship with Julian. Their stolen moments became rare, tense affairs. Ellie felt like a liability, a burden on his career, and the thought of her ruining his stellar reputation gnawed at her. One evening, after another grueling shift where she had endured public humiliation from Beatrice during rounds, Ellie met Julian at their usual cafe. The comfortable intimacy they once shared was overshadowed by a palpable strain. "Julian," Ellie began, her voice barely a whisper, "this isn't fair to you. Your reputation, it's being tarnished by all this. They're saying you're showing favoritism, that your judgment is compromised." Julian reached across the table, taking her hand. His grip was tight, almost desperate. "Don't even think it, Alara. This isn't your fault. This is Beatrice. She's a petty tyrant, and she's jealous. She always targets anyone who shines brighter than her, or anyone who dares to challenge her control." "But what if she's right?" Ellie pulled her hand away, her voice cracking. "What if I am distracting you? What if my judgment is clouded? I can't stop thinking about what they're saying, and seeing you stick your neck out for me, it just makes it worse for you." Julian's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare internalize their lies, Ellie. You are the most dedicated, skilled nurse I know. This is a witch hunt, pure and simple, and I won't let them get away with it." "But how will we stop them?" Ellie's eyes welled with tears. "They have HR. They have the entire administration behind them. Every time you defend me, it just gives them more ammunition. Maybe we should just stop. Stop seeing each other, stop talking outside of work, at least until this blows over, for your sake." Julian slammed his fist softly on the table, a rare display of anger from his usually composed demeanor. "Stop? And let them win? Let them destroy your career because of their pathetic jealousy? No, absolutely not." His voice was low, seething. "But what else can we do? Every move we make, they twist it. I feel powerless. And I hate it." Ellie looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in weeks. The lines of stress around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands. He was fighting for her, but he was also struggling, feeling the weight of the system pressing down on them both. This was their first real fight, not born of a lack of love, but from the immense external pressure, the feeling of being trapped. "I just don't want to be the reason your career is ruined, Julian," she whispered, tears finally falling. "I love my job. I love you. But I can't live like this anymore. Walking on eggshells, waiting for the next attack." Julian reached for her again, pulling her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You won't ruin my career, Alara. We'll find a way. We have to." But even as he said it, his own frustration and a sense of helplessness were evident in his voice. This was Ellie's lowest point. She felt utterly alone, trapped, and on the verge of losing everything she held dear, her job, her reputation, and potentially the man she loved. The formal probation period was a living hell. Each day was a tightrope walk over a pit of fire. Beatrice's passive-aggressive remarks became more frequent, her public admonishments during rounds more humiliating. Ellie was now so exhausted from the constant vigilance and the emotional toll that she felt herself teetering on the edge of burnout. The thought of finding another job, escaping the suffocating atmosphere, became a constant, tempting whisper. But where would she go? Beatrice's network was wide, and a termination, even under the guise of resignation, would follow her, effectively blackballing her from any reputable hospital. Then came the final blow. 2 weeks before her probation was officially set to end, Ellie was summoned to a meeting in the executive boardroom. This wasn't Beatrice's small, sterile office. This was the big leagues. Julian, his face grim, met her outside. "I tried to get in, Laura, but they locked me out. Mr. Davies said it was for your benefit to avoid further appearances of undue influence. It's a setup." Inside, Mr. Davies sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by Beatrice and 2 other stern-faced individuals Ellie vaguely recognized as members of the hospital's executive committee. The atmosphere was formal, chillingly polite. "Nurse Vance, thank you for coming," Mr. Davies began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We've completed our review of your probation period. While we acknowledge your technical skills, the committee has determined that a pattern of professional boundary violations and a negative impact on staff morale persists." Ah, Ellie's heart sank. She knew what was coming. "Therefore," Mr. Davies continued, picking up a document from the table, "we are presenting you with 2 options. You may resign immediately, citing personal reasons. In exchange, the hospital will not contest your unemployment benefits, and we will provide a neutral reference, simply confirming your dates of employment. We will also refrain from reporting any disciplinary actions to the State Board of Nursing, thus preserving your license." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, a false olive branch wrapped in corporate menace. "Your second option," Beatrice interjected, her voice sharp with undisguised triumph, "is formal termination for gross misconduct. This would involve a full report to the State Board of Nursing, detailing all the documented instances of your professional boundary violations and their impact on staff. We would, of course, contest any unemployment claims, and your references would reflect the reasons for your dismissal." Ellie felt a cold dread spread through her veins. This wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about her entire career, her future. Resignation meant conceding defeat, running away with her tail between her legs, but with her nursing license intact. Termination meant a black mark that would follow her for life, potentially ending her ability to practice nursing anywhere. It was a choice between a slow, quiet death and a public execution. I didn't do anything wrong," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm a good nurse. I followed every protocol. This is an unfair vendetta." Mr. Davies sighed, a performative gesture of exasperation. "Nurse Vance, we understand this is difficult, but the facts, as documented, are clear. We've offered you a compassionate exit. We suggest you take it." Beatrice offered a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's for the best, Alara. You'll find a place where your unique approach to professional relationships is better suited." Ellie felt a profound emptiness, a deep, crushing despair. It felt like the end. She stood, defeated, unable to utter another word. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, her shoulders slumped, her spirit utterly broken. As she stumbled out, blinded by unshed tears, a figure stepped into her path. It was Dr. Eleanor Vance, the hospital's chief medical officer, a formidable woman with an impeccable reputation and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. Dr. Vance was usually a distant, almost Olympian figure, rarely interacting directly with anyone below the chief of service level. Dr. Vance looked at Ellie, her expression unreadable. "Nurse Vance," she said, her voice low, almost a murmur, so as not to be overheard. "I hear what's happening. I've seen Beatrice Cole's game before." Ellie looked up, a flicker of surprise in her tear-filled eyes. Dr. Vance continued, her gaze direct and piercing. "Beatrice Cole has a long history here. A very long history of problematic nurses who always seem to have an unprofessional relationship with a doctor, usually one who is well-liked and respected. You're not the first nurse she's targeted, Alara. Not by a long shot." Dr. Vance paused, her eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "No one has ever had the courage to fight her. They all just resigned." The CMO's words were a cold splash of water, jarring Ellie from her despair. No one has ever had the courage to fight her. The words echoed in her mind. She thought of all the nurses she'd seen leave Street. Jude's over the years, always under vague circumstances. She remembered the hushed rumors, the knowing glances. Beatrice wasn't just targeting her. She was part of a pattern, A systemic abuse of power. The despair that had threatened to consume Ellie began to transform, slowly, into a white-hot ember of righteous anger. Ellie met Julian in the hospital garden, the same place they'd shared so many stolen moments of budding affection. His face was etched with worry and frustration. "What happened, Alara? What did they say?" he asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Ellie looked at him, her eyes still red, but a new light beginning to burn within them. "They gave me two options, Julian. Resign quietly or be terminated, and have my license jeopardized." She paused, taking a deep, shaky breath. "And Dr. Vance, the CMO, she told me something. She told me Beatrice has done this before, to other nurses, that no one has ever fought back." Julian looked at her, searching her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Ellie's jaw set with a new resolve. Her voice, though still a little hoarse, was firm. "I'm not resigning, Julian. I'm not going to let her win. I'm not going to be another name on her list of problematic nurses. I'm going to fight back." Julian's eyes widened, a flicker of hope and renewed determination igniting within them. He saw the fire in her, the courage that had been buried under weeks of systematic oppression. He saw the woman he loved, not as a victim, but as a warrior. He reached for her hands, lacing his fingers with hers. His grip was strong, supportive. "Good," he said, a fierce joy entering his voice. "Because I'm not going to let them get away with this either. We'll fight them, together." He looked at her, a fierce spark in his usually intense gaze. "Beatrice thinks she's untouchable because no one has ever dared to challenge her. But we're going to challenge her. We're going to build our own case." The decision was made. The shift from victim to protagonist was complete. The rage bait had done its work, turning despair into determination. Julian, seeing Ellie's resolve, realized that playing by their rules was a losing game. He began to discreetly reach out to other surgeons, to former nurses who had mysteriously left Street. Jude's looking for a pattern, for anyone who had been wronged by Beatrice Cole. They were no longer just defending themselves. They were launching a counterattack. The hospital's executive boardroom was transformed into an arena. The formal hearing for Alara Vance's termination was scheduled for a Monday morning. The air crackled with tension, a mix of corporate formality and barely concealed personal animosity. At the long mahogany table, Mr. Davies presided, flanked by Beatrice Cole and two other senior administrators from HR and legal. They looked confident, almost smug, armed with their meticulously compiled file of evidence. Across from them, Ellie sat, her back straight, her demeanor composed, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her sat Julian, not as her chief of surgery, but as her advocate, an unwavering pillar of support. He had taken personal leave to be there, a defiant statement in itself. Mr. Davies began with the usual procedural preamble, his voice dry and devoid of inflection. "This hearing is convened to review the recommendation for the termination of Nurse Alara Vance for sustained professional boundary violations and their detrimental impact on staff morale, as documented during her recent probationary period." He then gestured to Beatrice. "Miss Cole, as nurse administrator, will present the hospital's case." Beatrice launched into her presentation, a carefully rehearsed monologue of perceived grievances. She detailed Ellie's unprofessional closeness with Dr. Utsuno Karingasation. Croft, citing the coffee meetings, the cafeteria dinner, the excessive communication during shifts, and the distraction that led to the Mr. Davids incident. She painted a picture of an undisciplined nurse leveraging a romantic relationship for professional gain, undermining the authority of her superiors, and creating an unfair environment for her colleagues. She even included veiled, unsubstantiated claims from other nurses who supposedly felt uncomfortable by Ellie's presence. "In summation," Beatrice concluded, her voice resonant with false sincerity, "Nurse Vance's behavior represents a profound disregard for the professional standards of St. Jude's Hospital. Her continued employment would jeopardize the integrity of our nursing department and set a dangerous precedent." She sat down, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, as if the case were already closed. Mr. Davies turned to Ellie. "Nurse Vance, do you have a response to these allegations?" Ellie took a deep breath. She didn't rise to the bait of Beatrice's thinly veiled insults. Instead, she began calmly, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, Mr. Davies, I do. My response is that the allegations presented by Miss Cole are a systematic distortion of facts, a calculated campaign of harassment, and a blatant abuse of power. I have meticulously documented my own experiences over the past months. She opened her own binder, a document as thick and carefully organized as Beatrice's. First, regarding my professional relationship with Dr. Croft, every instance cited by Miss Cole as inappropriate was, in fact, a professional interaction. The coffee meetings were discussions of complex patient cases, a standard practice in a teaching hospital like St. Jude's. The late-night dinner was a meal shared after a particularly grueling 12-hour shift in the hospital's own cafeteria, with numerous other staff members present. My interactions with Dr. Croft during rounds were always focused on patient care, as the primary nurse for those patients. To suggest otherwise is to misrepresent the very nature of collaborative healthcare, she continued, methodically dismantling Beatrice's narrative. Furthermore, the claim of my distraction leading to the Mr. Davids incident is patently false. I was the one who identified the fever spike, the one who initiated the workup, and the one who ensured prompt treatment. There was no delay, no lapse in care. Then, Ellie shifted gears. Now, I would like to present the true nature of the hostile work environment at St. Jude's. Not one created by me, but one systematically fostered by Miss Cole herself. She began to read from her log, detailing every instance of Beatrice's harassment. The impossible shift assignments, the withheld information, the public admonishments, the subtle sabotaging of her charts, the deliberate misinterpretations of her professional actions. She calmly explained how Beatrice had attempted to entrap her, how she had twisted an overdose prevention into a disciplinary action. This is not merely disciplinary action against me, Ellie stated, her voice rising now, filled with a quiet power. This is a pattern of bullying, a deliberate attempt to undermine, isolate, and ultimately remove any nurse Miss Cole perceives as a threat or simply dislikes. This is an abuse of power, cloaked in the guise of upholding professional standards. Beatrice's face, which had been smug moments before, now began to contort. This is outrageous! These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled employee attempting to deflect from her own misconduct. Mr. Davies, looking uncomfortable, tried to interject. Nurse Vance, we are here to discuss your actions, not Miss Cole's. With all due respect, Mr. Davies, Julian cut in, his voice ringing with authority, we are here to discuss the truth. And the truth is, Miss Cole has a documented history of targeting nurses. Alara is not the first, and she certainly won't be the last, if this behavior is allowed to continue unchecked. He then stood, pulling out his own meticulously organized file. I have gathered testimony from other individuals who have experienced similar, if not identical, patterns of harassment and professional sabotage at the hands of Miss Cole. These are not disgruntled employees, but respected medical professionals who were either forced out of St. Jude's or continue to work under a cloud of fear created by Miss Cole. Julian began to read from the signed affidavits. Exhibit A. Beatrice Cole routinely assigned me impossible patient loads after I questioned a staffing decision. She created a hostile work environment, forcing me to resign in 2018. Statement from Rebecca Lowe, former SICU nurse. Exhibit B. After I received a positive performance review from a senior physician, Miss Cole began a campaign of nitpicking and public humiliation that made my job unbearable. I had no choice but to transfer to another department. Statement from Dr. Mark Jennings, former surgical resident. He continued, presenting two more similar statements, each one a nail in Beatrice's carefully constructed coffin. The air in the room grew thick with incredulity. The two other administrators, who had initially appeared bored, were now leaning forward, their faces etched with shock and concern. Mr. Davies, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled. The corporate facade was cracking. This is a systematic pattern, not isolated incidents, Julian concluded, his voice unwavering. Beatrice Cole has abused her position of power for years, systematically targeting and removing nurses whom she perceives as threats, or simply out of petty jealousy. She has used HR and administrative processes as her personal weapons. And Mr. Davies, your department, by failing to investigate these past complaints and by enabling Miss Cole's behavior, has been complicit. Beatrice rose, her face now a furious crimson. This is a conspiracy, a smear campaign. It's the truth, Miss Cole, Ellie said, her voice calm and firm, looking directly at her. And unlike your allegations, we have documented proof, not just of my innocence, but of your long-standing pattern of abuse. The board members exchanged grave glances. The carefully constructed narrative of a problematic nurse and a diligent administrator had shattered. The evidence of a toxic manager and a negligent HR department was undeniable. Beatrice Cole, who had thought herself untouchable, watched her empire of fear and control crumble around her. The rage that had simmered for weeks in Ellie, and in the hearts of those who cared for her, was finally finding its cathartic release. The silence that followed Julian's damning presentation was deafening. The board members huddled in a whispered conversation, their faces grim. Mr. Davies, his usual composure completely gone, nervously adjusted his tie. Beatrice Cole sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and sputtering rage, her carefully cultivated image of authority shattered. After what felt like an eternity, the lead administrator, a stoic woman named Miss Evans, cleared her throat. Her voice was firm, unequivocal. Based on the compelling evidence presented by Nurse Vance and Dr. Croft, this committee finds no grounds for the termination of Nurse Elara Vance. Furthermore, we are recommending an immediate, comprehensive internal investigation into the conduct of Nurse Administrator Beatrice Cole and the Human Resources Department's handling of past and present complaints. Miss Cole is hereby suspended indefinitely, effective immediately, pending the outcome of that investigation. Beatrice gasped, a choked sound of disbelief, but no one looked at her. Nurse Vance? Miss? Evans continued, looking at Ellie with genuine respect. Your employment is reinstated, with full back pay for any time lost. We sincerely apologize for the unjust distress you have endured. Ellie felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. Julian squeezed her hand, a triumphant smile lighting up his face. The resolution was swift. The internal investigation, spearheaded by Dr. Eleanor Vance, unearthed a shocking paper trail of similar complaints against Beatrice Cole, all of which had been buried or dismissed by the HR department under Mr. Davies's oversight. Within weeks, Beatrice Cole was formally terminated from St. Jude's Hospital. Her career in administration irrevocably ended. Mr. Davies, facing his own culpability in enabling a toxic work environment, was quietly reassigned to a non-managerial, back-office position, his influence effectively neutered. Life at St. Jude's began to change. The culture of fear that Beatrice had cultivated, dissipated, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of relief and openness. The nurses, once wary, now looked at Ellie with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. She hadn't just saved her own career, she had, by her courage, changed the entire department for the better. A few weeks later, Ellie was called into Dr. Eleanor Vance's office, this time for a very different meeting. Nurse Vance. Doctor, Vance began, a rare smile gracing her lips. Your integrity and courage have not gone unnoticed. You exposed a systemic problem and forced us to address it. We need leaders like you. We'd like to offer you the position of charge nurse for the SICU. It's a challenging role, but one I believe you are uniquely suited for. Ellie, accepting the offer with a thrill of anticipation, knew this was more than just a promotion. It was a testament to her resilience, a validation of her fight. The story ends on a crisp autumn evening. Ellie and Julian walked out of St. Jude's Hospital, hand in hand, no longer needing to hide, no longer fearing watchful eyes. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. You know, Julian said, squeezing her hand, I never doubted you for a second, Elara, but even I wasn't sure we could win against all that bureaucracy and malice. Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. Neither was I. But then I remembered what Dr. Vance said. No one had ever fought back. And I realized, if we didn't, who would? What kind of world would that be? Their trial by fire had not destroyed their love. It had forged it, tempered it into something unbreakable, something deeper and more resilient than they could have imagined. They didn't just fight for their love, they fought for what was right. And in doing so, they had not only saved Ellie's career, but had, together, brought a measure of justice and integrity back to the halls of St. Jude's Hospital. They walked on, towards a future that was, finally, truly their own.